here's my first go at doing a tactics video using the Play Creator. El Yuki made this, and it's a pretty cool device. You've got your Blood Bowl pitch around here, and you can use various teams. I'm going to be using Chaos to demonstrate, and Amazon as the other team, just because they're fairly close to the beginning of the alphabet. So let's assume we are kicking, and I'm just going to go through a few of the basics of what you should look out for when you're kicking. What I've got here is a sort of symmetrical setup. I've only got 3 players on the line, which is fairly standard. You might want to put more than 3 players on the line. For example, if you're dwarfs, you're all at armor 9. But in general, you only want 3 players on the line, because you only want 3 of your players to get hit on the first turn, and then 1 to be blitzed. At the moment, I've got my Chaos Warriors on the line, which is not the best strategy. Normally, you'll want linemen on the line, which is why they're called linemen. So let's remove those guys from the line, and let's stick some Beastmen on the line. That's my Minotaur there in the middle. So I'm just going to put those 3 on the line. It's fairly arbitrary whether you put 3 in the middle like that or 3 like that. You've also got the options for going sort of asymmetric as well, and it will sort of depend who you are facing. If you have some guard, then there is an option for going 3 in the middle like that, so they can protect each other a bit. I'll quite often go like that. If you put the 3 in the middle, then they're fairly likely to get hemmed in and not be able to escape. So if you had elves, there's probably a strong argument for putting them wider like that, because then, unless they completely surround them, then they can escape out that way. But if you're sort of a reasonably strong team and these 3 aren't, sorry, a reasonably well-armoured team and these 3 aren't very likely to die, then why not stick them in the middle? Arguments for the asymmetric one is you could go with something like this, where you just have a couple of players there and then you try and force him to go down one side. Particularly if you're a fast team, if you're something like Skaven and you were able to react him going down the other side if you wanted to, then that might be worth it. But almost always I tend to go for the symmetric lineup. So 3 on the line, usually like that, because that allows possible escape, but also a bit of control as well. What I'll then do is I'll leave 2 squares. I leave 2 squares basically because of quick snap. If you put your players up on the line like that, then he can set up for quick snap, and that'll allow lots of his players. Say he had some players there like that, and he got quick snap, he'd be able to engage lots of your players with his and get a whole fist load more blocks like that. So I always set 2 squares back. There's an aeroplane coming past, bizarrely. So always at least 2 squares back. Now, problem with this Chaos Warrior on the right hand side here is that he's a frenzy target. So even if the opponent doesn't have frenzy, I will very seldom do that. I will hardly ever stick a player there, because even if the opponent doesn't have frenzy, you can easily still get trapped on the sideline. So this basically the main way of avoiding that is to use this sort of winged formation here. What I will usually do is, if I've got a strength 4 player, I'll quite often stick him there, because that makes it harder for him to run down the lines. Or if someone's got block, I'll put him there as well, particularly if they've got stand firm or sidestep. Very useful to be on that outside as well. Although, having said that, recently I've just been conceding the wings completely, because it doesn't actually matter very much. There aren't very many teams where you're going to be worried about them passing and then running down there. And even if they do, you should be able to force them to score in 2 or 3 turns, which is actually what you quite often want when you're kicking the ball. Worth saying that if I win the toss, I almost always kick, because that means that going into the second half, you know what you have to do. If they've scored reasonably quickly and you've managed to score back, then it's 1-1, happy days, and you can just do an 8-turn drive and score 2-1. If they've scored and you haven't managed to score back, then you know you can either control the game and go for 1-1, or you can push for it if you particularly need a win, and go for the 1-1 quickly and then try and turn them over. And you've got those options available to you. So where did we get to? We've got 3 players on the line. So I will normally go with something like this. Probably a Minotaur in the middle there, a couple of Chaos Warriors. Looks something like that. Maybe the Minotaur slightly further back, particularly if he's got something that can kill Strength 5 quite easily. So we've got 3, 8, 11 players there. That's a fairly standard lineup for me. It does sort of allow them to blitz this guy behind here and run through there if they want to. But actually there's not a great deal of ways of stopping them doing that. So you could do something like that, which would allow the sides but wouldn't allow the middle quite so much, but then they'd be able to run through there. And then you've got options like that as well. So all sorts of different combinations there. That's quite a nice one as well, but they tend to be quite symmetrical. But basically 2 squares back, and then you've got your 8 players there and 3 on the line. So what do you do as the offensive player then? What you will basically do is try and get as many 2 dice blocks as you can. So what I've got here is a load of Amazon Blitzers. Let's stick those guys there. And this is quite often what I don't see new players do. So this is kind of the point. So let's assume that the ball is going to be kicked to the middle there. And let's set up to receive that. So let's have the thrower there. I will almost always have 2 players back just in case of throw a rock. If you only put 1 player back, it's pretty likely you're going to get hit by throw a rock. It shouldn't affect the probability, but there's that feeling that it does. And what I've basically done there is I've put 7 on the line to get as many hits as possible, and then I've stuck a couple of wide players out there in case he gets a blitz. Having said that, it's a terrible idea to put them there in case of the blitz, because he's got a Minotaur with Frenzy, and so if you put them there, they're fairly likely to be surfed. So basically I've got 7 on the line, 8, 9 to protect the wings in case of him running through, and the rest are just hitting targets. And so the idea is that you want all 3 of these players to be down. And so you start with this middle guy, and even if he gets a push, then you've pushed him along the line, and that allows this guy to do the next block. Push him along the line if you need to. This guy gets the next block, push him along the line, and you can push, block and block and block. And then once he's out the way, you've got this guy to do the option for the block. Okay, and then this guy's got the option for the block as well. And so it should happen that these 3 on the line will be down, and then you hopefully have got the room to get the 2 dice splits in there. Okay, and then this guy can come back again. So the idea is that on your turn, so when you set up, you should basically try and envisage your first turn. If you have this perfect first turn, what is it going to look like? And what it usually involves is these 3 players being down and the ability to have blitzed one of his players. Basically, at the start of each of your turns, what you should be thinking is, what is my blitz going to be, and what do I want the field to look like at the end of that first turn? So the only problem with this sort of strategy is if these are all pushes, then you have overcommitted to the line quite a lot, in fairness. That's the downside of this strategy. And so if you're playing against an Armour 9 team in particular, where you're not likely to get that many kills, there can be a danger to overcommitting. Because then it does soak all your players up on the line. Now, I've played Lizards quite a lot, and there have been 2 or 3 games where I've overcommitted to the line, and then the Saurus have been completely sucked in, leaving the Skinks in the backfield have it in all sorts of trouble. But basically, after I've done that, I'd want the thrower to have picked up the ball and to be there, and then the catcher just moving up like that. And so after your first turn, you want to hit a load of players. These ones would be down, and you'd be fairly safe on your first turn. That's the idea with the first turn, really, is to knock his players over, hopefully get a few armor breaks, and then go from there, really. There are other things you want to do. So if you're Wood Elves or something, and you particularly don't want to hit, then it might be that you only want. So if setting up again, so let's put the Beastmen back where they were. It might be that you only want to get a couple of blocks. You don't want to block all the way along the line, and you do want to protect the ball back. So it might be that you have other things you want to achieve on your first turn. It might be that you want to run through the line on your first turn, but that's not actually normally a good idea. Scoring in 2 turns isn't normally the best strategy on offense. But let's assume you wanted to. Then, so for example, if you were chasing, if you were behind and you were chasing, you might want to set up something like this. So let's have him there to protect the blitz. What I've done with this guy is quite important. You do need to be aware of the blitz in that if your opponent rolls a 10 on the kickoff table, then players in your tackle zone can't move. And so what this guy is basically doing is stopping these guys from having a turn if he rolls blitz. And that's something to be particularly aware of, perhaps against halflings, where you might get a couple of tree men in the middle there. And your opponent basically wants you to avoid those tree men because you're scared of getting punched. But what you need to do is to commit one of your players to there in order to stop them getting the blitz. So let's have a look where we want to run through. Have a look at something like this. So this guy would block him, hopefully knock him down, and then you'd want to probably target. Let's assume that's not a Minotaur. Let's say it's a Servant 3 player. You might want to do something like putting a Garda in there and then getting a 2 dice blitz on this guy, moving him to there, possibly following up, and then running people through the line, possibly handing off to them first. And so if you were in a rush, you might want to end up in a position that looked something like that. Okay, not an ideal cage there obviously, because you could knock out the side, but that's sort of what you want to do. But basically the idea is, when you are setting up on offense, have an idea of what you want the board to look like after your first turn, and then, assuming the dice are reasonably kind, you should be able to get to that position. And that's the idea. So we'll stop there as a first go and see how this one turned out.